Our final candidate this afternoon is Howard Major, and Howard will be asking or answering questions from the floor, and Dave Gare is going to be asking those questions based on some 3x5 cards that he has received this afternoon. We are asking that if you have questions for Howard, please put them on a 3x5 card and give them to Dave Gare. He also has blank ones. If you would raise your hand to get a blank card, he will take your question in that way. And then Dave will ask the questions from the 3x5 cards. And we did this very purposefully because we as a board wanted to make sure that we did not ask any questions that were improper or illegal. And so we asked that everybody put their questions on a card so Dave could peruse them before he asks them to make sure there's nothing on there that was improper. We have our attorney Lance here to tutor him and to answer any questions that Dave might have, like if it's a borderline question. So far, this is our 6th one of these, and so far we have just really done great in that process. You have in front of you, I hope, a yellow score sheet. Right, Archie? She's been tutoring me on colors. The yellow score sheet that we are using for the public forums. Please score Howard based on his responses, and we invite you to write comments on the back. After the public forum today, you are invited to please turn in your score sheets to a board member here in the room. Carol is here, Kevin, Ed, John, and myself are the board members that are here. You can turn them in to us this afternoon, or if you would like, you can send them to us by email. I have had that question, and you can do that. Or if you want to take a day and deliberate and then turn them into the board, you can turn them into Vicki Boring in the president's office. And she will make sure that the board gets your score sheets. I know some folks have said they went overnight to think about it a little bit, and that's fine. So just turn them into Vicki, and Vicki will make sure we get them. The score sheets will be made public. We are going to have a place to, a repository for them, so if anybody wants to look at the individual score sheets, they can. So if you would like your name on your score sheet, you can do that. If you don't have to. That's totally up to you. But please know that the public will have an opportunity to look at your score sheet. The Board of Trustees will then gather all the score sheets, tabulate them, read all of your comments. We, on February 2nd, are going to have an executive session. Actually, we're going to have 2 executive sessions. We decided this evening, one at 6 o'clock on February 2nd, and at the executive session at 6 o'clock on February 2nd, we are going to discuss the interviews with our interview committee that was made up of a member of the student body, administration, professional services, educational services, and faculty. And we are going to meet with those folks at 6 o'clock on February 2nd. We're going to then have a study session, and after our study session, we will resume executive session. The board will go back into executive session, and we will discuss the tabulation of the score sheets. We will look at comments. We will analyze the scores and the comments. We will talk amongst ourselves, and then on February 2nd, make a decision if we want to offer the job to someone, if we want to interview somebody for a second time. I've always forgot to mention that. Or if we want to start the process all over again. So we will know that after February 2nd, which is just next Wednesday. That's all I have to say this afternoon. I wanted to check my paper and make sure. Dave, take it away.
I'd shut that off, please.
Okay, first question. Given that this is a temporary interim position, why are you interested in this position?
I don't know if is this working?
Yes.
You care if I stand or sit?
Your choice.
Okay. Given that it's a temporary position, well, that's all right. I don't want a full-time position. I want a forever position. I'm perfectly happy with temporary. It works for me. I retired June 30th from here and moved to Phoenix, followed my wife's career down to Phoenix. And so we really are at a point where temporary works just fine. But why I really want to be present, I think, is because I feel like I still have some service to give to students and to faculty. And I feel that this is an opportunity to serve in a way that I haven't been able to before. Now, I think it is important because I think people become presidents for different reasons. Sometimes it is service, sometimes it is something else, and maybe ego. And I think it's important to differentiate. For me, it's service. I've really analyzed that and thought a lot about that. And frankly, never had a president on my career path in the past, but believe that I could make a contribution because of my knowledge of LCCC and my knowledge of leadership. I could bring those together and help provide kinds of things that would be really helpful to LCCC at this time.
What is your perspective on the role of the Associated Student Government, and how will you work with the ASG to address campus issues?
The voice of the student is very important in everything we do. Students are very important, and they're in the center of the circle, in my opinion. We need to constantly be asking students how we're doing. We need to constantly be responsive to students. They are the heart and soul of why we're here. We wouldn't have jobs without them, and they're the reason for our existence. So I think we always need to keep this in mind. ASG serves several purposes. One of those is to provide that voice of the students to us. Another is that it gives us an opportunity to help them develop their leadership skills. And I think it's important to, both of those things are important. Many of the students do have good leadership skills and incredible leadership potential. So it's an opportunity for them to basically understand themselves, understand how they can make a contribution, and we can further that with ASG if we work well with them. We need to listen carefully, we need to be responsive, and at the same time we need to guide. So ASG is a high priority.
You may have heard that the Board of Trustees has ordered an organizational audit. Please provide your views, comments on implementing organizational restructuring, and how would you handle the tough personnel decisions that are recommended from the audit?
Actually, I hadn't heard that had been ordered by the Board of Trustees, so but I can talk in general about organizational audits. I've experienced a time when there was one. I think from time to time it's necessary for any organization to kind of step back and take a look at our purpose, our mission, our vision, our goals, and then how we're structured, and does the way we're structured fit that purpose, mission, vision. And if it doesn't, we need to kind of trim and make sure that it does. There's an efficiency element to it. We need to be efficient. There's an effectiveness element to it. Sometimes we can grow without even realizing that we're growing in some areas. I get people appointed to positions, and they really seem to be needed at the time, but over a period of time, there's another shift, another point of view. And education is a little bit subject to fads, you know, I hate to say it, but we don't always look at the data. We do get caught up once in a while that this is the new trend, so we're all going to do this, and we kind of structure for that, and it may not really fit with our core mission and values and our core goals. So I think once in a while an organizational audit like that is needed. And some people are going to be in situations, and they need to have input, by the way. Everyone needs to have input into the process. But sometimes there's going to be situations where people are less than enchanted with what comes out of the audit. However, that's the reality is that our mission, our vision, our goals, and service to students has to come first. And the taxpayers, we need us to be efficient. They need us to be effective. And we owe it to the taxpayers to be as effective and efficient as we possibly can be. So I would say in this case, what you try to do is work with people and find ways that they can fit into the mission, vision, and goals. If that's not possible, sometimes there's some things you can do to support people and as they move to other organizations, and I think the term that I remember is outplacement. So there's some support that the college can provide for outplacement. I've seen situations where that was necessary. In Michigan, as you know, Michigan lives and dies by the auto industry, and when times get bad in the auto industry, we had to do some outplacement. There are ways to do that that can be constructive, and I think most employees in the situations I've seen found that as one door closed, another one opened. But the college does need to support them in that.
Please describe something you have learned from a mistake that you have made.
Well, I've got lots of mistakes I've made. I've found over the years that there's worse things than making mistakes, because you do learn more from mistakes than you learn from doing everything right. Remember, in my early teaching days, I made mistakes in dealing with students. And I look back on my first couple of years in the classroom, and I think I could have been more encouraging of students and less critical. And I think sometimes as employees in an organization, we tend to get overly critical of one another. And many of you know that I'm a fan of Peter Singe's. Peter Singe talks about when two people are working together and one pushes, and they both have the interests of the college and the students at heart. The other one doesn't see it that way, and they have a different perspective. They push back. And there tends to be this tension and this mounting degree of pushing. And I've been involved with some of that in my life, and I found that this is not productive. What I find is that what I need to do is step back and ask myself what I'm doing that is causing the tension, that's causing the problem, that's lending itself to making the problem worse. And then be open and honest with the other person and say that I have found some things where I realize that I'm exacerbating the problem. And hopefully this other person can respond as well, and we can meet in a court. But when I've been in situations, and sometimes you get defensive, sometimes it's ego, but I try to move beyond that to a position where I can say, I can see this is not productive for what we're trying to accomplish. I need to step back and ask myself how I am contributing to the problem.
What is your philosophy about offering remedial courses online?
Well, show me the data, I guess. There are many places that do it effectively and do it well. I think it can be done well. I think that you need to build maybe more support systems in, more checks for understanding, more opportunities to have conversations with the students that are in other ways rather than online. Telephone conversations or conversations that you'd have with them in person. But I don't think that you should make the statement that remedial courses could never be done online. I think there's a way to do them well, and they just require more support systems. So I think it needs to be carefully monitored, but I do believe it's viable under the right conditions.
What would you do as interim president to increase the morale on campus and improve the image of LCCC in the public?
Well, I think I would call people together and issue that challenge to us collectively, because I don't think that one person sitting alone in the office and coming up with a plan is going to do it. I think it has to be a collective process where everyone has an opportunity to offer suggestions. And some of you may remember we had a similar process when we first got into AQUIP. I called a community conversation, and we sat in this room and we all brainstormed about ideas. And we took those ideas and we wrote them on those octagonal pages, and we put those up in clusters depending on the ones that fit together or were similar. I think there's this affinity diagram process, is what they call that. But I think there's an opportunity to challenge people with that. A new president coming in, even on an interim basis, can challenge people to work together and to come together with the goal of working together and share their ideas about how we can do that. And the brainstorming sessions and things may come out that are honest conversation. That's okay. Sometimes honest conversation is necessary and can be done. But I think it's not something one person can do, no matter how well intended. It's something that we can only do collectively. The president needs to take a leadership role in challenging the people to do that, and perhaps even modeling some of those behaviors of bringing people together.
How do you build trust within the institution?
I think those are some of the ways. Trust is a kind of a funny thing. It's like being happy. You know, it's how do you make yourself be happy? It's kind of one of those things that the harder you try, the more difficult it is to do, the more elusive it becomes. I think what you need to do, if you know, they sometimes say, I know what we'll do. We'll go rafting together, you know, or we'll go rock climbing. We'll catch each other as we come down, and that will build trust. As soon as you do that, what people say is, uh-oh, I can see that the president doesn't think we trust each other because he's going to make us go rock climbing together. And so it becomes a reverse, you know, it actually makes things worse instead of better. So I think what you need to do is you need to have honest conversations, and you need to encourage honest conversations. And that doesn't mean dumping on somebody. That doesn't mean saying, and you're the problem, and I always knew you were the, you know, it doesn't mean this laying your stuff out on somebody else. It means there's a time when I say, I need to be honest. There's some things that we've done in the past, and this is how I felt about it and it affected me, and I need to tell you this. And the kind of conversations like that, if it's not dumping on somebody, can lead to trust. If you think a person's telling you the truth, then they're not just doing it to get even with you, but they're actually trying to construct something for the right reason, then that's the kind of behavior that will build trust. And it takes some time, and it takes some modeling, and it takes people to be willing to work together. But one of the main things the president needs to do, I believe, is to let people know that it's safe to do that, and that they're encouraged to do that, even if it means telling the president some things that the president may not want to hear all the time.
What is your style in dealing with personality conflicts between employees?
I think that it goes back to what I said before. There are going to be some times when we irritate each other. It's just the reality of every organization. And no matter what size of organization it is or what it is, there's well-meaning people who can see things differently and often do. And there's an element of civility that we're trying to work on a national level that we also need to work out on an organizational level, and every organization needs to constantly work on that. But I think that what we need to do is to let people know that there is honor and merit in trying to look to yourself and see how you're contributing to the difficulty, rather than just looking to see how the other person is contributing to it. And so I would encourage them to look to themselves and admit that in almost every conflict situation, it isn't one way. Almost every time it's two ways. So there's probably something I'm doing that is contributing to the difficulty. And there is honor in trying to find what that is and talking about it with that person. Now, you may not walk away as best friends and want to meet and hang around together afterwards, but you understand that the student and service to the student and service to the community is something that's so important that we're willing to make these efforts to work together.
What are your hobbies, and how do you balance that with your other commitments?
I will admit to being low on hobbies. I went down to Phoenix, and for the first month that we were in Phoenix, I didn't work. And poor Debbie, I think she was going to throw me out, but I got irritable fast. I need to be doing something constructive, and I once had a Mennonite instructor who talked to me about the Mennonite culture. I took a lot of philosophy and religion classes at Western Michigan University, and he said, you know, we don't have the concept in our group of playing. You know, if we play, we do something constructive. So he had a tractor and he farmed, you know, and for him that was playing, it was relaxation. And that's what I find is true about me. I needed to be constructive. So if I'm doing something constructive for somebody, it can be an enjoyable thing, and I do that. But I tried golf, and I tried a lot of other things, and I just didn't get much out of it. So I decided, well, let's just try to find something constructive that works out and can do some good for others. So right now, as director of the library at Pima College, and as a person who reads the research theses, and I can do something for somebody and enjoy the process at the same time. So I probably will always be looking for something like that that is pleasurable but constructive.
What are your thoughts about the role of co-curricular programs at a community college?
Co-curricular. Explain that to me.
Activities that are perhaps related to academics, speech and debate, athletics.
Oh, yeah.
There are numerous.
Okay, right. I'm supportive of those things. I think that's part of being a whole person. And I do believe that as we're helping people develop as a person, I was personally a coach when I worked in a high school, and I felt that the students that I coached learned some values and some skills that served them well in later life. And sometimes they're really closely related to the curriculum, and sometimes they're not as closely related to the curriculum. But the main purpose should always be for the development of the student. I'm not in favor of the win at all costs, and here's why we're doing these things for sports. In fact, when I was coaching wrestling, I used to put a limit on how much the kids could cut weight, so that they couldn't cut as much as they wanted, and so they were always mad at me for not letting them cut more weight. But I found it was harmful to them. It was more important that they be healthy than it was that they cut the extra weight and go out there and skin and bones and injure themselves and hurt themselves maybe for a long time. So I think that we have to keep that in mind. Some other things like the debate and the speech, those are directly related to life skills that people are going to need all their life. I feel that's part of a college curriculum, really. These are appropriate, and I believe they belong in community college.
What is your philosophy of promoting a fast-growing branch campus?
Well, again, if there's a need there, and the demonstrated need, and the data tell us that there's a need, I think that's fine. I think that colleges, branch campuses can be really useful. I think they can be helpful. One of the advantages and one of the reasons people choose community colleges is proximity to where they live. So if they live 30 miles away and you give them a branch campus that's near them and it meets specific goals and you know there's a need for that, then I think that's particularly, that's an appropriate thing for a community college to do. I've never been in charge of a branch campus, but I've worked closely with branch campuses in some other areas in Michigan where we had branch campuses in a couple other counties. And you just have to make sure that it is a focused mission so that it is meeting the needs of the people there. And it doesn't try to become another full campus and will not probably do everything that the main campus can do.
What about your experience, knowledge, and skills make you the best candidate for this position?
Well, I have not heard the other candidates, but I would say from my point of view, there's a couple things. I've been a student of leadership for a long time. Started the Ed Leadership program at Western Michigan University in 1978. Didn't get much out of it. Those leadership programs have a way to go. But I continue to read and be interested in leadership and found some people who I did have some things to offer. And I think what I've learned about leadership is that the servant leader is really the person that can do the most to build the kind of rapport and the kind of dedication that's needed from an organization. And this is no longer really a small organization. This is a fairly good-sized organization. And unless everybody is pulling together, this organization can get scrambled and reduce its ability to serve very quickly. So I think what I understand about leadership, it allows me to get people to pull together. And I've been able to do that in the past in many cases, and that's the only thing that can work. One person cannot do it. You cannot do it the old image of the hero leader, of the Jack Welch who's going to come along and save the organization, is really a myth. That's not really true. What a leader can do is inspire and facilitate and support the other people in the organization to take control of the organization and make it the kind of organization that they love. And I believe that I have that understanding and the knowledge that would enable me to be that kind of a leader.
Have you ever been president of an organization?
Oh, I've been president of several organizations. Some are statewide distance learning organizations. The National Distance Learning Organization, ITC, was president of that. I was president of some other things when I was younger in college and men's union board and things like that. They brought speakers into campus. An important thing, I think, we brought some excellent speakers to our campus. And so, I mean, I'm not belittling that, but that was a while back. But I have had the opportunity through distance learning, which was my main field in Michigan, to provide the kind of leadership that I think you're referring to. And I think that what I found was that people are willing to support a leader who is trying to build the entire organization and not just part of it. That it has to be something that will benefit everyone. And if you have done your work and your organization is focused, then you can, in fact, benefit from good leadership. If the organization is fragmented and everybody's pulling in different directions, it's very difficult to meet the organizational goals and to have the kind of organization you're proud of. And I think this is a very critical time for LCCC. I think it's a very important time for LCCC to have the kind of leader who can bring out the leadership skills in others and put others in the position of taking responsibility for growing the whole organization.
Please tell us about an original idea of yours that you were able to implement successfully.
Okay, Peter Senge came to Jackson, Michigan to speak. Peter Senge is a leadership consultant who I admire a lot. And his fee was $30,000 for the day, plus an evening speech. So the problem we had was paying for Peter Senge. We also had some others that we wanted to bring in, but we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. So I had an idea that what if we were to get a satellite truck on campus, uplink the speech to the satellite. This is 1993. So a lot of people were still doing satellite teleconferencing. And we advertised this and we tried to bring people in to the satellite sites around the country. And so we called Peter Senge and asked him if it would be all right if we uplinked his speech. He said, that's fine, I don't care, I'm giving the same speech anyway, so go ahead and uplink it if you want. And he was highly thought of nationally. So we advertised it in the Chronicle for Higher Education and in some other places. We had $300 a site, was the fee that we charged. And we had 170 colleges sign up at $300 a site. So we made enough money to bring in Peter Senge, Margaret Wheatley, Claire Crawford Mason, Lloyd Dobbins, and the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. And we paid for it all with the money that we did from uplinking. And so that was very gratifying. I felt really good about that. Then a couple years later, I changed. I went to Grand Valley State University, and my dean said, all right, we need a way to generate revenue. Think of a way. And I said, I got just the way for it. We'll take a national expert, we'll uplink him, we'll sign these people up, we're going to make some money. So we took the national expert in this one field we had on campus, the national expert. And it was a great opportunity. We publicized it exactly what I did Peter Senge. We put it out through the Adult Learning Satellite Service. We sent out brochures, postcards, Chronicle of Higher Education, 14 times across everybody's desk in the country that had anything to do with satellite downloads. We had 2 people sign up, 2 sites. Lost one. That was 1997. The topic we were trying to promote was counterterrorism. We were a little ahead of our time. So anyway, I just wanted to admit that I had a really good idea, And it didn't necessarily translate to the next job.
Over the past several years, enrollment at LCCC has grown. In several areas, including instruction, the number of employees has not kept pace. What strategies would you use to address this issue?
Well, I think your organizational review is one. I think you need to look at where the needs are, and they may be different than where they were 5 or 10 years ago, or the last time anybody really did an organizational audit to find out if we had the right positions for our current needs. So I think that's appropriate to do. I think you need to find out where the needs are, and maybe it's different. It sounds like, from my experience, it is possibly that we have not kept up with full-time instructors, and we need to look at that carefully. I think students get something from full-time faculty that they need. They get a mentoring, a bonding with the full-time faculty, and I think there's very possible that it's time to take a look at that and see if that's an area where we need to put more resources. But the data will tell us. I mean, my speculation at this point is not the answer. My speculation is just leads to, let's look at the data and find out if that's true.
How will you organize a $60 million budget?
Well, fortunately, there are support people to help with that, who know how to organize budgets. I've handled some large budgets in the past. In Michigan, the Perkins budget was huge. Being an auto supplier state, Carl Perkins money that came in for technology was very large, and I was in charge of that budget. At the same time, I was in charge of the LRC budget. But the reality is the budget, I believe, is just like any other aspect of the organization. It needs to be built from the bottom up. It needs to have feedback from people from the very beginning. And I've been at a college recently, not this one, but Ames Community College, where we did, in fact, have a participative budget building process, and everybody got to make their requests based on their needs. People closest to the action had the best understanding of where they needed it, and then as it filtered out, people made their arguments for why they needed the budgets they needed. Everybody got a chance to have their hearing, and then the prioritizations had to be made. Now, that doesn't mean everybody got what they wanted at the end, because certainly they can't. But everybody felt that they had a chance to have their input and make their rationale for why they needed what they needed, and then the process was democratic and broad-based. I think that's the critical thing I would follow.
Everyone fears change. How would you help during this transition, and who do you look to help with this transition?
Well, the people that are most affected by the change are the ones you want to get involved. They usually have the most information about what's going on and what change is needed. So I think that there is that principle in the quality literature and the quality processes, is you go to the people that are closest to the action. You know, that comes out of manufacturing to some degree. Remember, General Motors at one time would not listen to its line workers at all and didn't have any input from them. And the result is they paid the price because the line workers could see that a process wasn't working. They said, they won't listen to me, so I'm just going to continue to do it the way they tell me. I tried to tell them. So I think the main thing you need to do is listen to the people who are going to be most affected by the change. The next thing you need to look at is the data that tells you that if change is necessary. And, you know, it's, I said this in the last session, so I have to repeat it because it seems to fit here again. Deming's statement was, in God we trust, all others must have data. The idea is that we rely on data to tell us, you know, if there's really a change needed, or if it's the fad of the month, it's the fad of the year. And education is prone, you know, to going every 7 years. If you wait long enough, the next thing will come back. That's the idea that's been resurrected again. So to protect yourself from that, you need to rely on the data. So the data are another important part of the change. If you decide a change is necessary, support systems for the change. You have to look at the whole process systemically. You have to understand you can't change one thing in an organization without impacting the whole organization. The organization is a system, and it fits together. If you change one part of it, it affects every other part. So you have to build in an understanding, and you have to study how the other parts of the organization are going to be affected. Then you have to build in these support systems to make sure that when you're asking people to do something different, they've had the training that they need, they've had the materials that they need, the technologies that they need to make those kind of changes. And we don't always do that. We make the change first, and then they say, oh, well, we need the support systems. And they're like, well, we don't have that in the budget. We'll have to wait a year and a half. So we need to plan these changes carefully so that things happen in the right order. So you plan for the change before you implement the change. Then you need to build in a lot of measures to tell you what impact the change is having. And maybe have a negative impact. So you may want to build in frequent checks to make sure that the change is having the kind of outcome that you anticipated it would. If you don't build those checks in, you're very vulnerable to going down the wrong path for a long time. And the more you do that, the more upset the people that are closest to it get, because they see the problems that are occurring. So you build in those checks, you continue talking to the people, and then you make sure that if you do have a good idea, that you also benchmark that by looking at some other colleges who have gone through a similar kind of a change, put in a similar kind of a program, and learn from their mistakes, so you don't have to make every mistake yourself. If you look at benchmarking with other colleges, visiting them, you can learn a lot about what to avoid and where you can avoid the problems that they have.
How do you view the role of educational services staff in the decision-making process?
Educational services staff?
Not administrative and non-faculty employees.
Okay, well, they're employees, and as such, they're often closest to the processes. And believe me, they know the processes very well and can offer the input. Need to have an informal voice and also a formal voice. You need to have the utmost understanding that those are the people that can make or break a process. So in my opinion, because they are so close and because they do see exactly what's going on in a program, they're your key source for information. And the key people you need to be sure that you keep bringing into the loop. And if you don't do that, you do it at your own peril, because it's, you're going to be missing vital knowledge that you need.
Give us an example of a time when you led a group of participants with diverse views and opinions, but with the same goal. How did you bring them together to accomplish their end goal?
I remember one time I was on a distance learning committee, and distance learning was making a transformation from telecourses to online courses. And most of the people that were on our executive board, the national board, most of them were where they were because of the success of telecourses, and were victims sometimes of our own success. That worked so well for them that the idea that the world was changing, and the world was changing to online, was very, very difficult. We ended up with a big split of people who thought that we should get rid of telecourses and go strictly to online. Those people who thought that we should forget online and stay with telecourses. Those people who thought we should merge the two. We all had the same goal of promoting distance learning, but different people believed that different technologies were the way we wanted to go. And it was very difficult to do that. There's a lot of emotion there because people had lived with these telecourses for so long and they had been so good at these colleges and done so well. So what I found was you constantly had to bring people back to what is our vision and our mission and what are we going to be when we grow up in 3 to 5 years. Let's look down the road. What is going to be happening? When they would bring a speaker into a conference, there was this tendency to say, does anybody know a good speaker? Anybody know somebody we could bring in? And I would constantly try to bring it back to what are our vision and our goals? Then we'll pick the speaker to help reinforce what our vision and goals are for the future. So I think you constantly have to help people keep those goals in their mind. I know that many colleges put 4 or 5 major goals that are priorities for them. You know, we had change, diversity, leadership, and they were always in the top of our minds. And I think the president can help by keeping people focused on the big picture, people focused on what it is that we're after as a large college and how we get there, and separating the vision from the process of getting there. So if we can agree on the vision and talk through the processes, I think the role of the president is to help keep the eye on the prize, keep the eye on the big vision.
As all colleges do, LCCC has some instructional programs with consistently low enrollment. As the interim president, what would you do to support and encourage growth in these programs?
Well, sometimes it's appropriate. I would look at the jobs picture for the first thing and see what the employment figures, the anticipated employment is for those positions. If the anticipated employment for 3 to 5 years from now is high, you continue to invest in those programs. If the expected employment is declining and decreasing and the programs are hitting low enrollment levels, it may be time to cut them loose. And if you do that, then you do some retraining of the people who are in those positions so that they can move to another position. But it may be times you do grow them, and there may be other times when you don't grow them, and you transform them, make a transition to a program where there is a growth potential. And then you also have to decide things like, are we training students for Wyoming? Are we training them nationally if the jobs are in Boston? Do we keep a program here so that they can move to Boston? Those are philosophical questions that you have to ask yourself about what your mission is.
Explain a situation where you fell back and let others take charge. What was your motivation to do this, and what was the result?
I think I do it a lot. I did it a lot in the Arts and Humanities Division. I'd like to lean on the people there because they knew more about it than I did. And so my purpose was selfish because I wanted the program to work well. And they're the ones who knew the most about it. But actually, I just found that there's different ways to lead. You can have the person who comes in with a vision and says, okay, I'm going to make it happen. Or you can have the person who comes in and facilitates the right kind of conversation so that the programs can flourish, people can flourish, and I think that's the kind of leadership style that I have. I facilitate the conversations that can lead us to where we want to go.
What do you understand the role of the interim president to be and the board expectations, and how does this role differ from the role of a permanent president?
I really don't think there's a huge difference. I think that when the interim president comes in, that you don't just sit and wait for things to happen. I've heard some people say, we needed time to heal, so we should do nothing for a year. And I don't believe that's true because I don't think healing happens when you do nothing. I think you have to take a proactive approach to healing just like you do anything else. So I think the president who comes in needs to start that process. And I think there is a healing process that needs to occur at LCCC. And I think there's many, many growth opportunities that also are out there for LCCC and we need to move proactively toward. So I think the president needs to be proactive and needs to be a leader. I don't think it's a placeholder. I think it's a person who can and has the depth and the character and the quality to move the college forward. With the understanding that, yes, there's going to be a permanent president that's going to come in, but that president will find things underway that are useful, helpful, and the college is in better shape when the interim president leaves than it is when the interim president comes in.
If you were the successful candidate, what do you hope to accomplish during your interim appointment, and what would be your first priority?
Well, I think that those priorities need to come from information and from the data. So my first priority would be to listen to people and listen to them talk about the data that support, the information that supports their opinions. So I'd want to hear their opinions, but I'd also want to hear factual information that supports that opinion. So I think the first thing you need to do is have a time when people have the opportunity share their vision and what they believe should happen. They can do this in groups, they can do it individually with the president, they can do it with one another and bring it forward. And I think there's processes that we can use. I mentioned the affinity diagram. I think that those kind of processes are useful in having people prioritize. Now, 3 or 4 years ago when we started AQUIP, there were 3 main priorities that came out. One of them was take a look at advising, improve advising. Another one was to improve professional development. And the third one was to look and improve the transparency of the decision making. I think you need to revisit those and say, have we done it? Have we done those things? And are they still the priorities? I think you'd organize a conversation similar to the conversation that we had at that time, where you're brainstorming and you take those octagonal, cluster those and find out if those are still people's priorities. Once you know what people's priorities are, and you're based on data, then you make some decisions about how to get there. But I think there needs to be a time where we really look at what our priorities are. Have we accomplished those 3 things that we looked at in the past? If not, how do we get those done if they're still our priorities?
That's all of the questions I've received, unless there are others. That will conclude our public forum. Thank you.